Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to all on behalf of the Temasek History Research Centre at the Yusof Ishak Institute. My name is Terence and I'm the head of the centre. The Temasek History Research Centre was established in 2019. Its mission is to research Singapore's pre-modern history, its economic and social cultural links to the region, as well as its historical role as a trading centre. The centre seeks to pursue historical research from the 12th to the 19th century in order to deepen our understanding of Singapore's history and identity and linkages to the region. The centre and its programs are kindly supported by the Temasek Foundation. Today, we are very pleased to bring to you the first in a series of archaeology and art history webinar lectures. Over the next 6 months or so, this webinar series will offer 12 lectures on Southeast Asian history, culture, and civilizations, with a focus on the pre-modern and modern periods. It will bring together 17 scholars from various fields of expertise to share their insights and perspectives. This webinar series is divided into two different but complementary components, namely archaeology and art history. Together, they will provide a more holistic understanding of how ancient societies lived, worked, and traded in Southeast Asia. The archaeology lectures will cover topics such as the great civilizations and kingdoms, including Angkor, Divet, Ayutthaya, Majapahit, and Malacca. They will provide a broad overview of the rise and fall of ancient powers in the region and explain the interconnectedness of Southeast Asia. Meanwhile, the art history lectures will address the material culture and technical knowledge of Southeast Asian societies. They will cover the use of material culture in art and architecture, and how such material culture has circulated within the region through trade and religious networks. The lectures will cover Hindu and Buddhist civilizations, as well as the making of Islamic material culture from the 13th to 15th centuries onwards. This webinar series comes in place of our usual archaeology field school. Some of you may know that over the last 10 years, ISEAS has held about 6 field schools, which have brought Singaporean and regional students to a Southeast Asian country for 3 weeks to conduct archaeological surveys and excavations. At these field schools, students learn the craft of archaeology in historical sites such as Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and most recently in 2018, Trawas in Indonesia. Unfortunately, COVID-19 put an end to all travel plans for the foreseeable future. Our field school plans had to be shelved. Not to be deterred, the Temasek History Research Centre made the decision to leverage on digital technology to overcome these unexpected constraints. The old adage about every cloud having a silver lining was certainly true for us. While we may not be able to travel, with this webinar series, we are now able to reach out to a wider and more diverse audience than our field schools could. We are also pleased to note that the vast majority of speakers in this series are young, up-and-coming Southeast Asian scholars. When we were conceptualizing this series, we were determined to promote regional scholarship. As such, we made it a point to identify young scholars from within the region who have produced interesting work and provide them a platform to reach a wider audience. We believe these lectures will be an important source of knowledge and information for both Singaporeans and regional students. And in order to reach out to an even wider audience, we will compile these webinar lectures into resource material for students and interested members of the public. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce the two conveners of the webinar series who will also be giving today's introductory lectures. Dr. Helene Njoto is an art and architecture historian. She is currently the representative of the École Française d'Extrême Orient in Jakarta. She has a PhD in art history and an MA from Sorbonne. She directed our 2018 field school in Trawas, which was a research collaboration between Indonesians ARKANAS and ISEAS. And today, Helen will be presenting key points in Southeast Asia historiography, highlighting recent paradigm shifts and revisions. She will emphasize the importance of archaeology and material culture in the writing of the history of this region where textual sources are scarce. Dr. Noel Tan is from Singapore. He is a senior specialist in archaeology at SEMEO SPARFA in Bangkok. At SPARFA, Noel oversees the center's programs related to Southeast Asian archaeology. He has a PhD in archaeology from the Australian National University and an MA in archaeology from the University Science Malaysia, and he specializes in rock art. He's the editor of the SPARFA Journal and runs a Southeast Asian archaeology resource page. Noel will provide a general introduction into Southeast Asian geographies and cultures today, and he will proceed to offer an overview of the main historical periods that punctuate Southeast Asian history. So, Helen and Noel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Terence.
So Helen setting up the slides this morning. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are joining us. And welcome to our first of our webinar series on the archaeology and art history of Southeast Asia. The series is organized by the Temasek History Research Centre with the support of the Temasek Foundation. And right from the start, I'd like to thank the Centre for the opportunity to convene this course with Helene. Before we introduce ourselves more fully, I just want to go through some house rules. You would have already seen this in the slides that were running before this webinar started. First, the Chatham House rules apply. Chatham House rule applies for this webinar, which means you are free to use the information in this webinar, but not free to identify the source without permission. Secondly, I ask that you don't record or photograph or screen cap any part of the presentation, not just this one, but the future presentation in this series without permission. So please contact the speakers directly if you wish to use the information presented in the webinars. Some technical notes as well. If you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A function in Zoom. And we'll get to the questions and answers at the end of the presentations. Please identify yourself when you ask a question. And if you need to raise a technical question, you have technical issues that our team can help you with, please use the chat function in Zoom. So with those house rules out of the way, please allow us to introduce ourselves quite briefly. My name is Noel, yes, and I think some of you in the audience already know who I am personally already. I am from Singapore, born and raised in the East Coast, but now I am based in Bangkok. I work in SEMEO SPARFA, the Southeast Asian Ministers of Education Organization, Regional Center for Archaeology and Fine Arts. It's a very long acronym. We are an intergovernment organization and we work very broadly to promote archaeology and cultural heritage in the region. So convening this webinar is very much up my alley, very much part of my everyday work. I am an archaeologist by training. My specialty is in rock paintings. And over there in the top right, you can see some work that I did in Laos. So that's my brief introduction. Let me please introduce Dr. Helene Njoto. Helen.
Hi everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be here and to have convened this event with this actually 6 months webinar series with Noel and ISEAS team. It's been very big pleasure. So I am Helene Njoto. I'm based in Jakarta right now as a representative of the École Française Extrême-Orient, which is a French research institute, which has several branches in Asia. So I'm now in Jakarta. I'm actually working on a collaboration with the Indonesian National Archaeology Center, Research Center on early Islamic art in Java. I previously worked on early modern colonial architecture history in Java, and more recently, so I am focusing with my colleague Dimas on early Islamic art and architecture from roughly 15th to early 18th century. So back to you, Noel.
All right. So before we start, I thought we would run a poll first. Because, when we designed this webinar series, we were initially designing this for Singapore students, but we are online and we're coming from all around the world. So just very quickly, could you just fill up this poll? I'd like to find out where you are joining us from. So you're from Singapore or from Southeast Asia, not Singapore. Can we take maybe a minute to just fill up this poll that's appeared on screen? And I'll just wait for a few more seconds, and then we will get an idea of where everyone is coming from. Okay, let's end the poll and let's see where all of us are coming from. So 40% from Singapore, 40% from Southeast Asia, and oh, that's pretty good. That's quite nice. So hello everyone from around the world. Wherever you are, I'm very glad you're here with us. So by way of an introduction, right? This entire series is really an introduction to the archaeology and history of Southeast Asia in the last 1,000 years. But before we get to the last 1,000 years, we're going to be a bit ambitious, and we're going to try and give you a brief background to everything. So I'm gonna try and condense the last 70,000 years of history in 10 minutes. We're going to show you many examples of material culture around the region. And we're going to start with the idea of Southeast Asia. Next slide. So what is Southeast Asia? I'm sure you're familiar with ASEAN. This is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And the main visual element of ASEAN is the bundle of rice stalks. So one stalk for every nation. There are the 10 official nations in the bloc. And because rice is common in all our cultures, maybe food is a good starting point to think about what is Southeast Asia. So we think of Southeast Asia as a food region. All of us have some form of meat on a stick. We have some form of rice and curry. We have some form of food wrapped in banana leaf. Also, right in the center there, you see pepper. Our food uses a lot of spice, and this spice will play a part in our story later, as you will see. But already you see in our food some broad similarities, and also a lot of diversity in our region. This diversity also extends to our landscapes. So we have beautiful beaches in the top left. This is the island resort island resort of Langkawi in Kedah in Malaysia. So this is not a very well known tourist location because it's quite out of the way. Goa Charita, it's a secluded beach. You see this jetty there, which leads to a rock art site. So, like I said, I'm interested in rock art. In the bottom left, we have rice terraces of Bali, but this scene can also easily be played out in the Philippines and in Vietnam, and you have other landscapes from Thailand and from Laos. Southeast Asia also accounts for 20% of the world's plant species. This is just a selection of plant and animal species, sorry. This is just a selection of mammals that we have in Southeast Asia, dolphins off the coast of Bali, the menacing monkeys from the Batu Caves, of course, elephants from Laos and Thailand. And in the bottom middle of this picture, those two cute animals. These are my favorite animals of all time. These are binturongs, and they are my favorite because they look like bears, but they move like cats. And they also smell like buttered popcorn. So how can you not love animals like these? Of course, in not the animals that's also diverse, it's also the peoples and the cultures. Here's just a selection of the different people groups that you have in Southeast Asia. I'm not going to go into any one in particular just yet, because there's so many and I don't want to pick favorites. But it's also a nice reminder of a time where we didn't have to wear face masks, and I hope we get to that point someday. I'm sure someday soon. And next, please. And of course, with the different cultures, we also have the different religions, and Southeast Asia is where many of the world's major religions are practiced. So in the bottom, we have Islam and Hinduism represented by religious monuments in Singapore. I think people living in Singapore might recognize these as famous landmarks. And on the top, we have Buddhism and Christianity, but not what you think. So the one on the left is not a Buddhist temple, it's actually a Catholic church in Bangkok. And you can turn the slide. And the one on the right is not a Gothic cathedral. Next, please. It's actually a royal temple in Ayutthaya, and it's a Buddhist temple built in the style of a neo-Gothic cathedral. So you can also see a lot of acculturation, a lot of cross-cultural mixes with our religions here in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. And of course, along with the major formal world religions, you also have a rich tradition in animism, the belief in spirits that inhabit objects and places that need to be accorded proper respect because these spirits are both benevolent and malevolent. And so what I've been trying to do with this series of images is, and I've not underlined this enough, that there's a lot of diversity across peoples, across cultures, across landscapes and religions in Southeast Asia. And we can make some generalizations and groupings, but there is a reason why, and we see this in the t-shirt, it's a reason why we can say that Southeast Asia has a lot of same, but different. Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noel. So I think you can hear me. So Southeast Asia was as you know, defined as a region only in the 20th century, actually late 20th century, as a geopolitical notion that the creation of ASEAN, as Noel reminded us, has contributed to validate with its 11 members that you can see here. But as you witnessed in the very recently, with the South China Sea disputes, the borders of Southeast Asia are actually contested, maritime borders are contested. So you see, this is actually still a moving definition. So in the colonial times, for example, up until quite recently, it was still referred as Further India, Greater India. By the Europeans, it was referred to as the East Indies or the Indies, and the continental part was referred to as Indo-China, which was a combination of our neighboring cultures, China and India. The Chinese sources refer to Southeast Asia as Nanyang, the southern oceans, and so on. So you see that it's also a matter of perspective. So Southeast Asia usually is segmented in two parts: the maritime section, which is called the Malay World or Archipelago, or Insulindia, which describes the maritime region between Indochina and Australasia. And on the continent, you would have also, recent terms such as Zomia, which describes a social space in Southeast Asian continental massif, which was made famous, as you know, by political scientist James Scott recently, in 2009, with his book Zomia, The Art of Not Being Governed. So these names have changed over time and are actually still moving along with new critical scholarship. As you will see, the name Monsoon Asia is one of the last trends among historians of the pre and early modern past. Monsoon Asia actually highlights the shared and connected history through maritime channels along south. East and Southeast Asia into one single overarching region. So names vary also according to the point of view of what historians want to highlight about this region's past and identity. In Paris, in the ethnographic museum, Musée du Quai Branly, for example, Southeast Asia is actually categorized under under Oceania and not Asia, because of their ethnographical approach to tribal art. And some of our speakers will also address a Malayo-Polynesian paradigm. I'm thinking about Imran. So this is to show that the name Southeast Asia is a moving notion. It is more and more seen as a narrow, contested notion that that researchers are increasingly bringing to attention. They're bringing to attention its inclusion in a more global network of exchanges. So back to you, Noel. You're muted, Noel.
Got it. So what is archaeology? And so here is a collection of our favorite media images of archaeologists. Who the media would have you believe that we are swashbuckling adventurers like Indiana Jones, or forensic analysts like CSI and Bones. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. What's really important is that archaeologists. I mean, I don't go running around with a whip and a hat, but I and most other archaeologists study the past through physical remains, and so this physicality is a big theme in our webinar series. This materiality is a big theme in our series, and we study the human past. And so you'll find that archaeologists tend to specialize in a particular region. So you'll see this from many of our speakers. They are specialists in, or they come from a particular country, a specialist from a certain region. Next slide, please. Or you find that some archaeologists are also focused on specific types of materials. So for like me, I said I specialize in rock art, which are ancient images, not so ancient images, cave paintings, rock engravings. Some of our colleagues specialize in bones, bioarchaeology, stone tools. Some of us specialize in architecture and ceramics. And you'll see a lot of examples in the coming lectures. And some of us have very specialized skill sets, such as underwater archaeology. So the picture on the top left is from our colleagues at the Temasek History Research Centre. This is from the recent discovery of shipwrecks in the eastern Singapore waters, which is been a really exciting discovery only in the last 2 weeks. Next, please. So before we get to the last 1,000 years, I said I'm going to try and summarize the last 70,000 years of Southeast Asia in around 10 minutes. And I've divided this into 3 periods, very broad generalizations. Prehistory, the Neolithic and Metal Ages for I know some of my colleagues will probably call me out later. And then we have the Protohistorical Period. So I'm going to say that these are very broad generalizations because they happen at different times at different areas. Now let's start with prehistory. Next slide, yes. I've put an arbitrary date of about 70,000 years, and that's because that's when we start seeing the evidence for the first evidence for modern humans in Southeast Asia. So Homo sapiens, us, modern humans started coming out of Africa around 100,000 years ago, and they moved their way along the coast to India. And by the time we find evidence for them in Southeast Asia, we get to around 70,000 years. In Borneo and Philippines, we find evidence for modern humans for dating to around 40,000 years. And this lines up very well with the evidence we have from Australia, because we know that humans reached Australia from the archaeology over there. We know that humans reached Australia around 50,000 years ago, and they have had to pass through Southeast Asia, probably through Papua New Guinea on the way there. Next slide. And of course, some of the oldest rock art in Southeast Asia matches up very nicely with this history of early human occupation. Some of the oldest rock art in Southeast Asia is also some of the oldest rock art in the world, dating to around 40 to 45,000 years. And we have a series of sites from Indonesia that have been in the news over the last few years. Notably, all these sites that are really old are about 40 to 45,000 years, and if they are found in Indonesia, that it probably means that there is rock art in mainland Southeast Asia that is as old, if not older. Now, during this time, this time which I call prehistory, humans lived in small groups, and they lived in nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyles. We know that they used caves either as for shelters, maybe seasonally, not permanently, because they also probably moved around from place to place. Because preservation in caves is, preservation in the tropics is very bad, and things get preserved in caves a lot better. So most of our evidence from the deep past comes from caves. And from this evidence, we know what they ate, we know what they left behind, we know the lifestyles they led. We know that life was unchanging, I guess. Lifestyles were pretty stable for thousands of years. We don't see any big technological changes. You might see differences in diets as people moved around and found new food sources. But lifestyles pretty much was same from 50,000, 60,000, 70,000, right up to about 20,000 years ago. Next slide, please. And so on the map here, you have on the left, you have a map of Southeast Asia around 14,000 years ago. The sea levels were much lower then. So what you see on the right is a graph of temperature changes from the last 400,000 years. So, but just pay attention to the last 50,000 years. So at 14,000 years ago, there was a lot of dry land. So this part in yellow that you see on the left, this was all dry land. The sea levels are much lower. You could literally walk from Bangkok to Singapore to Jakarta. And right around 14,000 years ago, so you see on the graph on the right, this lower dip, that's around 14,000 years. But after that, you see that temperatures start rising sharply. And because of that, sea levels rise. And so that area in yellow go underwater. And so humans start, people start moving, concentrating into the green areas, into what we think of modern Southeast Asia today. And also, this caused another population movement from the north, people from what is now China moving southward. Now, unlike populations in Southeast Asia where most people were nomadic forager hunter-gatherers, people in the north brought with them agriculture, or seem to have brought with them some agricultural technologies. But we know that by around 4,000 years ago, we can start seeing a shift in lifestyles around the region. Or we can start seeing, instead of people living in caves or seasonal shelters, we start seeing the emergence of more permanent settlements. So on the left, you see ranges of permanent settlements around Southeast Asia. Usually they're located near rivers, near the bends of rivers. We see evidence for agriculture and ceramics, and I'll explain the significance of that in a bit. And also you'll find evidence for the most famous population movement in Southeast Asia, the so-called Austronesian movement of people who spoke a so-called Austronesian language. They came out of South China into Taiwan and then down to the Philippines and to the rest of Southeast Asia, where they now form the major language group. So Malay, Indonesian, Filipino, from as far west as Madagascar to as far east to the Pacific Islands, we have this group of people that have a shared linguistic culture, and they seem to have emerged from Taiwan around 4,000 years ago and spread very quickly across the region. Now, traditionally, we call this population movement brought about new technologies. We call this periods the Neolithic, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. They suggest a sort of technological progression that may not necessarily be there. And because they appear at different times at different places, I'm not going to talk so much about a Bronze Age or an Iron Age, but I'm going to talk about the emergence of new technologies. So like on the side on the left, in Ban Chiang in Thailand, UNESCO World Heritage Site, you have a record of people living there around 3,500 years ago. And you find all these burials and you find all these pots in these burials. And then in the Philippines, in southern Philippines, you have these fabulous jars from Mindanao. They date to around 2,000 years ago. And they were burial jars. So you find them associated with, I think they would put the bones into these, and each face represents a different person. Now, what pots and elaborate burials tell you is that people now had the ability to store things. They had the ability to produce a surplus, and it also meant that they didn't have to forage as much. They didn't have to move around from place to place looking for new food resources. So they had an ability to produce food in one place. They didn't have to be nomadic anymore. And that's why pots are very important in archaeology, and also because pots are very durable. They're one of the few things that last, and one of the few things that archaeologists can still see today after thousands and thousands of years. The next technological innovation that comes is bronze metallurgy. Bronze starts to appear in Southeast Asia around 1,200 years BCE, about 3,000 years ago. And what bronze indicates is an ability to control fires and produce high temperatures, high enough to start melting ores and extracting ores. And we find a lot of these bronzes tend to be beautiful ritual objects, meant to say decorative, but they are certainly are functional, but probably ceremonial as well. Likely used for trade and ritual. These are examples of bronzes from Vietnam. The bronze drum on the left seems to be highly prized, in fact, because it gets around the region. You find them all across Southeast Asia. And then following bronze, we have the emergence of iron. From around the 5th century BCE, and then all the way to the 5th century in the Common Era. Iron's much stronger than bronze, and we see, when we have bronze weapons, but they tend to be more ceremonial rather than functional. Whereas when iron starts appearing, you start finding more evidence for iron being used in warfare. So this cluster of iron arrows in Vietnam, they're not pretty, but they get the job done. So they're not ritual use, they're not ceremonial use. These were meant for one thing, and they're meant for killing or meant for warfare. Also on the map on the right, this is a map of Northeast Thailand. You start seeing the emergence of moated sites across Southeast Asia. So this is just a map of moated sites in Northeast Thailand. You see the emergence of settlements, but not just settlements before, but suddenly security and defense becomes a concern. So they become moated. They seem to be defensive positions. As a result, you see we have the beginnings of concentrations of power. So not just so this power concentration is not just meant for warfare, but also for resource exchange and for trade. And so by the first millennium CE, we have very good evidence that there's a lot of long distance trade going on. So on the map on the left, you see a distribution of jade artifacts and a very distinctive pendant called a Ling Ling O. and they're found across the coastal areas of Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Thailand and Malaysia and Philippines. And all these jade artifacts come from one single source in Taiwan. So the raw material comes from just one place in Taiwan, or just a few places in Taiwan. So they get around. We haven't back these, thank you. And then in the middle, you have beads in Thailand, but these beads are coming from further west, from India and Sri Lanka. And then on the right, these are Roman-style ceramics, Roman-style pots. Ceramics that are made in India, but then they are found in Bali. So we have evidence for exchange not only within Southeast Asia, but beyond Southeast Asia too. So, we think of Southeast Asia today as a very interconnected place, but Southeast Asia 2,000 years ago was also a very interconnected place. There was a lot of long distance trade going on. And so from the middle of the first millennium, we start seeing the beginnings of early state, what we call the Protohistorical Period. And we call them proto-historical because we don't have many inscriptions that give us a fuller understanding of these states. But we have a lot of materials that give us an idea that certainly the concentrations of power that we're building were growing. And we find that many local rulers, especially around the 4th century CE, in the Common Era, started adopting Indian religions and customs as a way to display power and status. We see a lot of monumental architecture being built. So the Nissan Sanctuary in the top left, and Sambor Pekuk in the bottom right. And Sambor, both of these are World Heritage Sites, and Sambor is going to later on develop in Angkor further inland. But all these monumental architectures also send a signal, because it also shows that people were able to marshal forces to be able to build large architecture like this. So we start seeing what we call the early states. We know that they are state-like. We just don't have any, we don't have much evidence for writing that gives us a lot of understanding of what life was like in the first millennium, other than to say that we know that things were going bigger, things were going stronger. And of course, now we get to where this webinar series begins. Eventually, these states become regional superpowers of their own. They rose to power, they declined sometimes. They were at war with each other. At some point in time, everyone was at war with each other. They were jockeying for influence and power, control over territory. And they declined because of warfare with each other, climate change in some cases, and also because of external forces like the arrival of the Europeans. So in this webinar series, we're going to take a closer look at some of these larger empires operating in the first half of the second millennium in mainland Southeast Asia. So we have in our next webinars, in our next talk, we have Dr. Heng Pipao on the 21st of July to talk about Angkor, and he's focusing on the infrastructure of the empire and what it takes to keep a machine like this moving, roads and water management and keeping a population under control. In Myanmar, we have Mr. Yem Yet Yuen, who formerly of the Bagan Archaeological Museum, to talk to us not only on Bagan, but Mrak U further west, a kingdom further west. So look forward to that. Dr. Pacharapon Panamwanana Ayutthaya, and the hint is in her name. She will talk to us, she will explore the idea of urban cosmopolitanism and global connections to Ayutthaya. Ayutthaya was very famously connected to the world for its time. It had sent missions to France. It had embassies from the Dutch, from the Japanese in Ayutthaya, and that's in the middle of around the 15th and 16th century. We have Ayutthaya rising as a regional superpower. And then finally, we have Dr. Alex Giang, who is based in the Imperial Citadel in Hanoi. And he'll talk about the Great Viet, the Dai Viet Kingdom, based in today, what is today northern Vietnam. So these are the major empires that we have in mainland Southeast Asia. Then when we get to maritime Southeast Asia, we have Dr. Nasha Kaur from USM, University Science Malaysia, will give us an archaeological perspective of the Malacca Sultanate and its ongoing legacy. And finally, we come back to the spice routes, where we have Shinatria to talk to us about how the spice trade changed our region. And now I move the floor back to Helene.
Thank you very much, Noel. So what Noel just showed is the general narrative of 70,000 years history of Southeast Asia, what we know, what is written in textbooks. So let me now give you a brief introduction, since a lot of you are starting your studies in Southeast Asian history. Let me give you a brief introduction to how these narratives are constructed, how historians of Southeast Asia create meaning with the sources available. So this is called historiography, which is usually coined the history of history. In other words, the way in which historians record events, phenomena. You know that Southeast Asia witnessed events such as the early influence of East Asia or South Asia. Other historical events often looked at are, for instance, the coming of Islam from the 13th century onwards, the coming of Europeans in the 16th century onwards, and their settlement into colonial empires, as Noel has just shown. Another term I'd like to bring to your attention is paradigm. This is a term that you guys will very probably read a lot. Paradigm, which is a shared interpretation of a scientific community in a defined field. In this case, in our case here, history or archaeology. So you'd have the colonial paradigm, Indianization paradigm, Islamization paradigm, and so on. Now, these paradigms can change thanks to revisions allowed by the discovery of new sources. And this is where archaeology and material culture are so crucial in the writing of Southeast Asian history. As Terence and Noel mentioned, this is a region where textual sources of and inscriptions are relatively limited compared to our neighbors. So let's have a look at one of these paradigm shifts that occurred recently about Southeast Asia, mainly thanks to archaeology, which is the Indianization paradigm. So until about the 1960s, so about 60 years ago now, Southeast Asia ancient past chronology and narrative used to be divided between, on the one hand, about the 5th century BC, a faraway prehistorical period with what Orientalists thought were primitive societies not yet touched, quote unquote, by greater civilizations such as the Indian civilization, and much later, towards the 5th century CE of the Common Era, a so-called historical period where Indianization started. And this Indianization started to help civilize, quote unquote, Southeast Asian societies, with polities adopting a Brahmano-Buddhist culture from India, bringing new concepts of state, universalist religions with props like statues, temples, etc., but also iconography, architectural knowledge, Sanskrit, and script, that gave them the ability to adapt and transcribe their own languages, such as, Javanese or Khmer. So this means that in between there lied a millennium-long gap, a sort of no man's land, seldom addressed by historians, as if the passage went straight abruptly from primitive societies, quote unquote, in the prehistoric period to an elaborate civilized Indian society. As I will show later, of course, this was not the case. So before I talk about the paradigm shift, a word about the reason why, the reason for the historiographical gap in the writing of Southeast Asian history. It mainly happened for two reasons. One reason of method and another more political. Okay, so this whole millennium gap period went unrecorded due to a lack of sources, as Noel showed. Sources started to be much more numerous in the first centuries CE, and until recently, archaeology also as a discipline only came out from a sort of secondary role after textual sources to complement data. So the other reason is the lack of accessibility of the terrain of regions to study. The youngest among you, especially those born in the 1990s, need to be reminded that many Southeast Asian areas were still under geopolitical tensions, which did not allow for archaeology endeavors, especially large-scale archaeology endeavors, until the 1980s, roughly. So, for example, the 11th century Temple Mountain, the Bapwon, the restoration of the Bapwon could only resume after 20 years because of the Cambodian Civil War. More recently, I remember during one of our ISEAS field school that Terence was telling us about, one of the field schools in Cambodia led by Kyle Letinis. I was very surprised to see that archaeologists still have to have their plots unmined, mines removed before they start working. Coming from Indonesia, this was quite shocking. The second reason, the more political reason for so-called Orientalist scholars to promote this vision of an uncivilized quote unquote region prior to an Indian culture influence was a political, the colonial agenda. So let's remember these scholars wrote in the 1940s up to the 60s. We're still in the colonial paradigm where ideas of a greater empire, in this case, India, but by extension, the European empires had a mission to civilize or bring progress to Southeast Asia. Sorry. So, however, a paradigm shift occurred, which started to happen in the 1960s with two groundbreaking articles by Harry Benda and John Smile promoting the decolonization of Southeast Asian studies. And by the way, these were published in a Singapore-based journal, the Journal of Southeast Asian History, now the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies by NUS, which I strongly recommend. So I strongly recommend to read, for you to read these two articles for those starting Southeast Asian studies. So, most scholars looking at the history of Southeast Asia nowadays have been influenced by this new trend of thought, pleading for this autonomization of Southeast Asian studies against the Orientalist point of view. So they promoted not only looking at European sources, but they promoted interrogating more and more indigenous sources and materials and points of view. And this is where we're still at, actually. So let's now have a look at how archaeology helped bring to life this long millennium gap of complex sets of networks. So in the 1980s, there was another breakthrough with an archaeologist called Ian Glover, whose work in West Central Thailand revealed early contacts with India during this proto-history period. And more studies also after that showed that knowledge was not received passively in Southeast Asia as previously argued, but that the societies of Southeast Asia had played an active role of agents in transmissions. So exchanges were ongoing as early as the 5th century, in fact, and exchanges were not only unidirectional from west to east, to India, to Southeast Asia, but also coming both directions. They were bilateral. So this long gap is now called the Protohistorical Period, as Noel reminded us, and it is now known to really have witnessed transcultural and mutual processes, and this actually before the 1st century CE. Of course, we need to be reminded that philologists' work are extremely important. Sheldon Pollock is a very important name. Sorry. He wrote this innovative work, Sanskrit Cosmopolis, which spanned through South and Southeast Asia in the 1st millennium BCE, which has largely contributed to the shift of paradigm that I'm talking about. So the 1960s and 80s also witnessed a shift in focus from documenting almost strictly the elites and palaces, and big religious buildings and texts, to looking actually at more mundane daily life material culture, settlement patterns, etc. And this mainly helped identify the agents who produced, sold, exchanged these goods, the technologies they used, etc. Let's now zoom into material culture proper. For those of you starting in this discipline, what is material culture and why is it important? So material culture gathers artifacts, objects, as indicators of social and economic activities. They're considered as markers of exchanges and knowledge. The role of artisans in the proto-historical period has been highlighted in particular by recent archaeology and material culture work, particularly by the study of glass industry, nautical technologies, textile and ceramics. Ceramics, for example, as you can see here, an example combined with archaeology of burial sites is actually another example of heuristic value. So the benefits, of multidisciplinary studies. Just recently, as Noel reminded us, an archaeological international study on the northern coast of Bali showed evidence during this very proto-historical period, this millennium gap, what thought was a gap. In fact, it showed that trade exchanges of ceramics were ongoing between India and the Spice Islands in the eastern part of Indonesia via Bali. Urban patterns is another domain that has helped fill this proto-historical gap. Some of you have visited Angkor Borei in Cambodia. This is another example of an early millennium CE of a large urban Indianized site, probably, Okeo in Vietnam is also known to be has also been influenced by India as early as the 2nd, 3rd century CE. Nautical technology is also very important. Recent works on shipbuilding techniques show that technology traveled not only west to east, but actually east to west. Southeast Asian ships, but also shippers have been confirmed to have played an important role in exchanges between east and west. And actually, the opposite has not been proven yet. So the role, the agency of Indian ship and shippers in Southeast Asia has not been proven. Beads, glass and precious stone beads is another example which highlights the agency of Southeast Asian makers in the proto-historical period. A recent French-Thai study in the peninsula Thailand showed that glass and precious stone beads were imported and locally produced for, a growing local market as early as the 4th century BCE, before the Common Era. So you see the heuristic potential of archaeology and material culture. There are many more types of artifacts that researchers are looking at as we speak. There's a numismatic, the study of coins and charms, metalwork, goldsmithing, jewelry, stone and metal tools, burial traditions, mortuary practices, vernacular, domestic architecture, etc. Painting, all sorts of paintings. Noel was mentioning cave murals, etc. So we'll not have time to address them all in the coming 6 months of our webinar series, but we will address a few of them, all pointing at the importance of local agency and the creation of a singular culture and knowledge in the Southeast Asian region. Architecture, monumental architecture, is one of the most looked at among the disciplines, naturally because of the size of the buildings, such as the iconic Angkor, Bagan, Borobudur, or even the Dieng temples in central Java. In all these cases, as will be shown by Choti Macaturawong, although Indian knowledge can be identified, these structures are uniquely Khmer, they're uniquely Burmese, uniquely Javanese in style, etc., which tends to bring evidence again to the importance of early local agency. Pottery, as I said, is not only an early witness of technological transfers from India to Southeast Asia. As will be shown by Heidi Tan, they mainly reveal from an early period on proper know-how and mass production techniques with exported goods much beyond the region's limits, such as Vietnamese or Thai pottery, to cite among the most famous ones. Reliefs are very important in Southeast Asia because, as I said earlier, Southeast Asia did not produce as many textual sources as did other parts of the world, such as India or China in the early historical period. Reliefs depict elite, but also everyday mundane military and religious communities, as will be shown by Nathalie Ong. Almost every aspect of these communities' life has been represented, from scenes of protocol, furniture, dances, other arts, military technology, agriculture, trade goods, etc. It's all depicted almost now. It needs to be interpreted. And as will be shown by Sandra Sarjono, thanks to these reliefs, art historians have also been able to gather an incredible precise knowledge of the textile motifs, trends, techniques, and high-end trade. Now, bronze is another material that informs us about Southeast Asian agency and technologies. As Noel just reminded us earlier, bronze is known to have been used from a very early period on, but as will be shown by Mathilde Micheling and Eko Bastiawan, although canonical figures from the Hindu-Buddhist period were inspired from abroad, local producers developed their own unique Southeast Asian styles. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our last speakers about material culture and another paradigm that I mentioned earlier, which is the Islamization paradigm. Now, this is another very interesting paradigm. The coming of Islam in the late 13th century. Islam came on top, as you know, of an early complex set of Indic and local pre-Indic beliefs and culture, all the way to the South Philippines. However, the material culture produced in the early centuries of Islamization is still seldom looked at apart from tombstones. So this is a paradigm that is quite well in the writing. And the question of agency in this particular period is absolutely fascinating. What is most striking about the spread of Islam in Southeast Asia is that, unlike the Indic culture that came in with imported props from India, such as the Hindu and Buddhist statuary and temples, the Islamic belief came almost barehanded. So this left Southeast Asian societies free to invent decor, build mosque, write, and draw manuscript illuminations, as we will see, in their own terms. So apart from the tombstones that you can see here, very few artifacts have been really thoroughly studied. Now, this the fact that Islamic belief came almost barehanded, this resulted in among the most singular artistic expressions in the Islamic world, such as superimposed roofed mosque, which is a combination of early Hindu-Buddhist architectural types that form an iconic architectural type in Southeast Asia that spread all the way from the northern tip of Sumatra, actually much beyond in the west, to the Philippines at the east, as will be shown by Imran bin Tajuddin. Nurashikin binti Zulkifli will also show that many artifacts from this Islamic Cape paradigm bring evidence of Southeast Asian creativity, from textile to wooden decor, as shown here. In this regard, the Asian Civilization Museum in Singapore is actually playing an important role in the introduction of Southeast Asian Islamic art into the world Islamic art narrative. Can you imagine that even today, with a quarter of the Muslim population in the world being in Southeast Asia is not represented by Islamic galleries in international museums such as the Louvre or the Metropolitan Museum, as if, in fact, Islam had stopped its spread in South Asia. So finally, manuscripts, seals, and manuscript illuminations are two other art historical domains that are absolutely unique to Southeast Asian Islamic art, as Farouk Yahya will show us. Illuminations were used until not so long ago for divination and magic practices. They show fascinating acculturation between Islamic and local beliefs, local spiritual knowledge and imagery. So Noel, I think I will stop here. I would just like to say that I really hope that a lot of you today will join us in this 6 months webinar series, which will be an opportunity to introduce a new generation of promising scholars from Southeast Asia or based in Southeast Asia, some still junior, others already well established. And I hope that Noel and my presentation gave you a bit of a hint on the marvels that you will see during the next coming 6 months. Noel? You're muted, Noel.
Keep forgetting to do that. Now, if there was one thing that we wanted to wanted you to take away from all of this, the idea that everything is connected. So you'll find this example that we have here. These are on the left, we have a Khmer style bronze sculpture of an elephant. Now, these bronzes came from Angkor Wat, and then when Angkor was sacked by Ayutthaya, it was taken to Ayutthaya in Thailand, and then Ayutthaya in turn was sacked by the Thangru, the Burmese Empire, around the 18th century, I believe. And then it was taken to Rakhine, and then taken to Mandalay, where these bronze statues are now standing in the Mamuni Paya in Mandalay, and people still go there. There's a common belief that if you have a headache, you go and touch the head. If you have a stomach ache, you go and touch the stomach, which is why you see the bronzes are particularly polished around the tummies and around the heads, because a lot of people have headaches and stomach aches. But this example shows that there's a lot of connections between the cultures of Southeast Asia that go around. So material culture moves around. Everything works and everything is in contact with one another. And we hope that when you see this in the upcoming webinars, so we have very focused webinars on specific topics, but we hope that you take an opportunity to step back and also see how they're connected to their neighbors, how these material cultures move around and they're being used and shared, and so how empires interact with one another. They rise and they fall in conjunction with one another, and they interact with each other. Sometimes they grow together. We have a really exciting lineup of this is probably the and so this is the end of our introduction to this series, to our introduction to this series, and we hope that you'll join us in our upcoming lectures. So first up, we have Heng Pipao to talk about Angkor on the 21st, and then we have Natalie and Sandra to talk to us on the 4th of August about relief sculptures and textile representation in Southeast Asia. So we hope that you will join us then. We hope to see you then. And for the full range of lectures, please visit the ISEAS website, and we hope that you will join us in our webinar series and explore the rest of Southeast Asia. We can't travel around so much, but we can bring Southeast Asia to you. So with that, that's the end of our presentation proper. We do have a couple of minutes to do questions and answers. If anyone has anything to ask, I will invite you to use the questions and answers question and answer panel. But we hope not, because I think for what it's worth, you know, overviews are just overviews. Right? You know, we glossed over a lot of topics, and we would like to have the meat, the real presentations come with our speakers in the coming lectures.
Noel, we have Hima from South Sulawesi, who had a problem with her Wi-Fi. Apparently, she's asking whether the today's lecture will be uploaded.
Yeah, I've asked her to send us an email, and we will try and address that. Well, so I've got a question from Kim Healy. Is the emergence of moated sites considered part of the Neolithic Metal Age or the Protohistorical Period? The moated sites in Northeast Thailand and in the greater part of mainland Southeast Asia are often characterized as Iron Age moated sites. So they're part of the Metal Age. Now, there's a reason why I try to stay away from the idea of a Bronze Age and Iron Age, because they do tend to be sometimes they don't get applied uniformly across the region, and so sometimes it's not helpful to say, you know, the Iron Age in some parts of Southeast Asia can begin in the 5th century BCE, but it can also begin in the 5th century CE, and it's like 1,000 years difference between them. So sometimes I'm reluctant to say Bronze Age and Iron Age. That being said, the Neolithic, the moated sites tend to be characterized as Iron Age. Harith asks, how can I get involved with archaeology in Singapore? I'm an archaeology grad, having studied in UK, and I direct you to my colleagues at the PHRC. But Harith, please email me, and people ask me this quite often, and please email me, and I'll try to respond to you. I have a question from Zihao. How do archaeologists know whether an influence is unilateral or bilateral exchange? How does archaeology identify the origin of ideas and the spread of influence? Ooh, this is an interesting one. Helene, you might want to chip in if you can. Now, the traditional idea for Indianization, especially when we talk about exchanges and unilateral exchanges, is that suddenly we see the first millennium, everyone in Southeast Asia taking on Indian names and taking on Indian religions. And so it seems also almost as if the religions went one way. But we do have textual sources from China and from other places of exchanges of spices in particular, or perishable materials going from Southeast Asia in exporting into other areas. And these things don't last in archaeological records. So we can't detect them in archaeology, but we know that they existed because of the texts. And so we know that there is some sort of exchange going on. So it's not just as if Southeast Asians were passively getting all these ideas and then adopting them, but obviously there was some sort of exchange going on for people who want to come here. Wow, this is a really complex answer.
I guess if I can just chip in, this is why comparative studies are very important, Jihao, because you know, knowing whether it's unilateral or bilateral, if you find the same you know, artifacts or technologies in two different places, then you know, then you have an idea that, you know, they were bilateral. And the question about the origin, now this is something that historians don't really look into so much, the origins, because it's really clear now that, you know, ideas circulated, ideas very much circulated, and having, you know, set an origin of something somewhere very quickly, you know, new research will find out, will show that in fact it was, you know, this same idea actually circulated and found a very different expression, which became something very new for that region as well. So so that's a question that is not so much looked into so much. I just want to answer, oh, I cannot see the question anymore. The person just before who asked about archaeology in Singapore, do get in touch with ISEAS. So the Temasek History Research Centre has an archaeology unit that has several activities going on in Singapore. Of course, right now, I guess they're a little bit on hold, but they are ongoing. It's a small team of very dedicated archaeologists that I've been working with previously. And NUS also has a history program with, you know, teaching archaeology. And so if you're looking into, you know, archaeology endeavors, archaeology projects in Singapore, I guess these two institutes would be good to contact. Now, the teaching of archaeology in Singapore is another question. That is something that needs to be definitely developed. So usually you would go to you know, another for basic and more advanced teaching, you would have to go to other areas. But other areas of Southeast Asia have archaeology programs. I mean, you know, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, etc. So unless you're strictly interested in Singapore, but if it's Southeast Asia, then you would have many other options. Sorry, so we have other questions?
Yeah, just going to preempt everyone because we have a whole bunch of questions and I'm not sure we can answer everybody in time because we have to finish this in a couple of minutes. So I've put my email address on the chat box. If we don't get to answer your question, please feel free to email us and we'll try and accommodate there. Helen, would you like to choose a couple of questions?
There's one for you, Noel. What are the names of the sites with cave paintings in Southeast Asia?
Oh, like over 1,000 sites. I do have a rock art page on my Southeast Asian archaeology website, a page dedicated to rock art over there. And so maybe I'll direct you to that. That has everything about rock art of Southeast Asia that you can check over there.
Will we be covering by Saida Buang? Will we be covering Sriwijaya and Majapahit? Not you know, we will not have, not specifically, we will not have seminars dedicated specifically to Sriwijaya and Majapahit. We had to make a choice. We only have 6 months to cover, you know, a very vast region and very long time span, but they will definitely be addressed in 1 or 2 presentations. And actually many presentations, even the material culture presentations will address the material culture from Majapahit, especially, I think, Sriwijaya to a certain extent too. So do join us, Saida.
Yeah. So with that, I'm sorry, I think we have to end here because we have to end at 11:15. So yes, please, my email address is on the chat. On the chat box, please send it to us for questions. We'll try to get to them in a later time. If not, we will see you again on the 21st of July for Dr. Hinckley Paul's talk in Angkor.
Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you very much for your questions, and do join in. Your questions will be addressed, will be answered during the program in the different seminars, you know, more specific seminars. Thank you for joining us for this general introduction.